When the statute calls for chemical degradation, does that contemplate the biologics? I mean, it's not a chemical compound, as I understand.
Mr. Chairman, let other proponents speak to that as well, but I think that the devices in question here would provide a patient with a notification regardless of the drug type, whether any temperature change outside of the approved range had occurred.
All right. Anybody else?
Mr. Chair,
Delegate Farrell.
I just have a question for, I don't care any of them, but is there really only one company that does this, or are there other ones? Because it'd be kind of odd if there's only one and you guys are here for the bill, to be frank.
Mr. Chair, Delegate Farrell, there are multiple companies that manufacture devices, multiple devices out there. I brought a sample of some of the devices Temptime manufactures. They have stickers that cost pennies all the way to $6 systems that are inserted in trucks. So there are multiple companies, multiple types of devices, and these are the devices we manufacture.
Thank you.
All right. Anybody else in support of the bill? Anybody in opposition to the bill?
Morning, Mr. Chairman. Karen Addison on behalf of the PCMA, Pharmaceutical Repair Management Association, representing the PBMs. We do believe that this mandates a temperature control device in all of our shipping. I want to let you all know that the FDA does regulate the shipping and storage of drugs for mail order pharmacies, and we do follow manufacturer guidelines for shipping and storage of drugs. Mail order pharmacies do have sophisticated shipping and tracking protocols to ensure proper temperature control, and we do believe that we should be allowed to use the appropriate device at the appropriate time. So I'm just speaking to the provision of the bill that requires the temperature control.
Anybody else?
Mr. Chairman, just briefly, Karen, have you seen a substitute though? Does that still require the device? Because my reading of this is nowadays it's substitute. It's basically just has that written notice that the drugs that potentially could cause degradation if you don't maintain the temperature.
Well, what I read on line 25 is it says the consumer can detect temperature variances. So to me, that would indicate that you would have to use a device to do that.
Delegate Garrett.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, as I read it, it doesn't really require the device. I think it. Thank you. I'll talk to council. Thank you.
All right. So the process here, as you know, we're working off the subs that got put in now. So it's the way it is. Anybody else in opposition? Line 4 is on the left.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Nicole Keeber on behalf of CVS Caremark. My concern with the language of this bill is it's the substitute version now is it addresses a method approved by the USP, the United States Pharmacopoeia. USP, it's my understanding, doesn't address methods, but rather the package design. And so we're considering a method that USP doesn't regulate at this point.
All right. Any questions about this?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Robert Barata here this morning on behalf of Express Scripts and America's Health Insurance Plans. We are in opposition to the bill for a couple of reasons. One is it addresses just one part of the supply chain, where you start out with the manufacturers, it goes to the wholesaler then to a distributor then maybe to a PBM or to a drug or a drugstore, and then off to the patient themselves. So what you're talking about is just the mail order part of it, whereas you're not talking about the regulation when it comes from the manufacturer to the wholesaler, and the wholesaler then to the distribution point. And those parts there, the temperature can change, and there's no way that you would know as the PBM or as even at the drugstore that the temperature had been regulated to that point. So it doesn't deal with that part of it. The other is that there are other indications that are important from the manufacturing standpoint, which are humidity and vibration along with temperature, and you're only addressing one part of this. So I would urge you then to send this issue to the Board of Pharmacy, where they have some expertise and look at it, and then perhaps include that in their legislative package next year if it is an important part for consumer protection. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Doug?
just a question for that if I could. So, based on what you just told us, is that to let us all understand that even though we have regulations existing inside the pharmacy to control everything, that from the manufacturer to the pharmacy, there's no way that a pharmacist knows when they get any drugs that they have, that they haven't followed some kind of quality control procedure, so that by the time the drug gets into the pharmacy, they are not necessarily still potent?
No, I'm saying is that, yes, absolutely, that there's no, if you're looking at temperature, there's no temperature, no way that they know that the pallets that are shipped.
And there are no regulations and guidelines along the way in the supply chain up to
Let's
this
come
point?
to the chair.
Mr. Chair.
More questions, Doug?
Sorry, Mr. Chair, one of the questions, Mr. Chair, notice is already required that there's temperature degradation. If you're a patient, you get this. I know when I pick up a prescription, if there's a need for temperature control and that there could be degradation if that's not maintained, there's some kind of a notice that's given, and that, I believe, is a requirement. Is that not the case?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure about that notification.
So I was going to take Chairman's privilege and ask the Board of Pharmacy to come forward.
Good morning, Carolyn Jurin, Executive Director of the Virginia Board of Pharmacy. The manufacturers and wholesale distributors are licensed and regulated just as the pharmacies are. There are currently standards in place with respect to the shipping of the product at each level of the supply chain process. The United States Pharmacopoeia currently addresses temperature variances that are permissive at the various points in the stage. So they are regulated, yes.
All right. You complete your line of questioning, Doug, go ahead.
So, Mr. Chairman.
I think we've gotten there enough. Yes, sir.
All right. Doug Sparrow.
I'm just a little confused because I hear on one hand, yeah, we're regulated. On the other hand, no, it's not. So, but the Board of Pharmacy saying it is, at least, but, so, it is apparently, but, so can somebody, I don't care which side from, how is it regulated, whether it's, I guess I've heard the FDA, how does the FDA decide for somebody how it's regulated, put in the mail?
Mr. Chair, Michelle Satterlin again for time. Our understanding are there are no regulations related to that last mile of the delivery. There is guidance, the United States Pharmacopoeia and the FDA, well, and I brought the guidance, says temperature is a critically important condition, control, that must be included for each drug product. So there is guidance, it's not a direct regulation that requires it, and we are attempting on that last mile of delivery to allow the consumer to have the knowledge they need to make that decision.
All right. Does that complete your question?
I've got more than I had before, but I'm good right now,
Randy,
Mr.
you want to
Chairman.
weigh in on that? Full committee is pending.
Sorry, just to clarify, so the FDA, Congress recognizes the United States Pharmacopoeia as the national standard-setting body for various aspects of pharmacy and healthcare deliveries. So the United States Pharmacopoeia does have standards in place that the board then has the authority and does recognize and enforce with respect to how products must be shipped. And there are allowable excursions within those USP standards.
All right, thank you. I'm going to let the rest of the folks who want to speak in opposition go ahead and get that over with, please.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Kyle Shreve. I'm with the Virginia Association of Health Plans, and for the reasons previously stated, we also oppose the committee.
Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, Jeff Palmer with Reed Smith on behalf of Kaiser Permanente Health Insurance. The legislation that's before you, Kaiser does a lot of mail-order pharmacy. The legislation that's before you would increase the costs for those mail-order pharmacies. We were asked to review a substitute of the legislation that's very different than the version that's before you this morning. So that we just haven't had time to review the substitute that's before you. Thank you.
Else, you want to wrap up?
Mr. Chairman, my comments earlier are my wrap-up.
Okay. All right, committee, you have a substitute before you. Is there a motion? Doug, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I really like this legislation. However, I think as much as I was grilling a witness and making it look like I didn't take what he said to heart. I do think the suggestion of perhaps referring this to the Board of Pharmacy for further consideration, so that we get it right, might be prudent. And so I would move that we refer this to the Board of Pharmacy. Can we do that? Can we, or have you send a letter to them, or how do we go about doing that?
We have the Uber chair sitting back there. My pathway, I think, would be that we would table this and ask the chairman, who has a mighty pen, to write a letter to the Board of Pharmacy and ask them to engage this and address this.
Before I introduce that motion, would it be all right to ask the patron if he would be amenable to that as a direction for this?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, then, Mr. Chairman, I would so move.
Okay, there's a motion to table. Is there a second? Second. Okay, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposition? No. Okay, let's, all in favor of table, raise your right hand, all sub one. All right, take your time. Okay. All opposed to table. Have two robust no's. Okay. Delegate Council, you really worked hard on this, and I think you made some progress in bringing out the issues, so I appreciate your work on that.
Thank you, Dr. Mann.
All right. Okay. Last bill, Delegate Philipore.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, if I could distribute this.
Brevity will be.
Yes, I understand, Mr. Chairman. I understand. Thank you. And thank you, members, Mr. Chairman. Before you is HB 2404. This bill is quite clean, simple to understand, and crucial. It would create an advisory council for PANDAS, Pediatric Acute Onset Neuropsychiatric Syndrome, also known as PANS and PANDAS. This council would advise the Commissioner of Health on research, diagnosis, treatment, and education relating to this syndrome. I actually was first, this illness was first brought to my attention from a friend whose son was afflicted with PANDAS living in Springfield, and I have since had the opportunity to meet with several individuals, including the president of PANS and Research Advocacy Initiative, Jessica Gavin. I know she is here today with several other parents who would like to briefly share their story. Many of you have had the opportunity to learn more about PANDAS as she's visited you all, and they're fully aware, Mr. Chairman, that they'll be very, very brief.
Just ask the folks to come up with very brief.
Jessica.
Thank you, delegates. My name is Jessica Gavin. I am the president and founder of PANS Research and Advocacy Initiative. Most of you have welcomed me into your offices and heard my son Dexter's story, but for those who haven't, he was diagnosed with autism at age 2.5. And yet every time he got ill with a bacterial infection and was treated with an antibiotic, his autism disappeared. ABA therapists were stumped, speech therapists mystified. How is it week to week my son would come to therapy, appearing to one day present with autism and others completely healthy? I brought this to my doctors time and time again and never heard anything other than that's not possible. Or interesting, let's watch that. A year later, after much research and traveling to Florida and New Jersey for a doctor's familiar, we finally received a diagnosis of PANS. Dexter had MRSA at 3 weeks after birth, and I am convinced it was this bacterial infection that was responsible for his neurological health. Just last week, my kindergartner came home in tears, sweating and shaking profusely, certain his teacher's eyes had turned black. This weekend, his best friend had a birthday party, and Dexter was too anxious to attend, even though he was dying to be there. Currently, he is hoarding coins in his room and asking hundreds of the same questions a day because of his intense OCD. But when he's on steroids and antibiotics, he has zero mental health symptoms, none. Most cases are not this complex, and yet much more severe. One child in our community committed suicide last month after going undiagnosed for 4 years and being 1 month out from receiving IVIG immunoglobulin therapy, which is said to be highly effective for many kids. Most cases are typically developing kids who, for lack of a better term, go insane overnight. Some are more mild manifestations like my son. Others sleep at the foot of their parents' bed, refuse food for fear of being poisoned, and have severe vocal and motor tics. This is a spectrum disorder, and even the most mild cases are wrecking families and robbing kids of their childhoods, and if caught early, could likely be prevented. It takes an average of 3 years and 8 doctors to receive a proper diagnosis, and much longer for proper treatment. Because doctors are painfully unaware symptoms, and proper treatment. According to the National Institute of Mental Health, if caught early, a 30 to 60-day course of antibiotics may be enough to put this disease into remission for good. If left untreated, permanent brain damage can occur. There are over 150 families we serve in the state. According to the PANDAS Network, a leading national nonprofit, 1 in 200 children have PANS. After speaking with Dr. Sweeto at the National Institute of Mental Health last week, I have found that she believes that number to be accurate. What this means for Virginia is 1.8 million children. We have 9,370 children untreated and misdiagnosed. Since starting our organization 1 year ago, 3 of my own friends have gone on to get a diagnosis, and 1 is being successfully treated. How is that possible when some pediatric offices have no cases of diagnosed PANS or PANDAS? It is simply because of lack of awareness. I am a walking advertisement of the signs and symptoms, and I urge parents to research into their doctor's offices. If pediatricians were as knowledgeable as I am, so many children would benefit from early diagnosis and speedy treatment, and perhaps bypass a lifelong chronic illness. I get calls and emails weekly from scared parents who don't know where to turn. It is my sincere hope this council will help educate pediatricians on the protocols established by the PANDAS Physicians Network, a network of medical professionals and researchers under the mentorship of NIMH Neuroscience Branch Dr. Susan Sweeto. Educate the school systems on how to address behaviors and school absences due to chronic infections and to implement effective 504 plans. We have willing PANS and PANDAS knowledgeable immunologists, neurologists, researchers, and advocates, and educators to sit on this council. I please encourage you to support this bill so we can lay the groundwork for proper treatment and speedy diagnosis for our children and families who are suffering so intensely.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Delegate Farrell.
I have a quick question for the patron, Delegate Fillicorn. Is there a fiscal impact?
Not as far as I know.
I'd like that answer. Mr. Chairman, I have a motion at the appropriate time. I would move to report this really good bill.
Second.
Okay, that's properly made. Any discussion? Delegate
Mr. Chair, I would like to say to the patron, I have received so many emails, and I had a great visit with the organization and got to learn so much about something I didn't know about. And so I want to thank you guys for your effort prior to today. And so I mean this second as no disrespect to those that showed up today, but I think that we have all received great information prior to this vote.
All right, all in favor of reporting House Bill 2404, please raise your right hand. All opposed? Okay, bill's reported.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
That concludes Subcommittee 1's work, and I guess the Uber chair is on his way up.
Great.